Technology isn't just a part of our everyday lives anymore. It's become a frontier for global powers, with India right in the mix. So why not join the conversation? Take the Technopolitik Survey, created by researchers at the Takshashila Institution. It's just 10 simple questions, but your answers could help shape India's strategy in navigating the fast changing world of high tech geopolitics. Your voice matters, so let's make it heard. The link is in the bio.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Takshashila Institution, where we dive deep into the ideas and policies shaping India's future. I'm your host, Swathi Kalyani. I work in the Geospatial program and I have with me Ashwin Prasad, who researches on space technology at Takshashila. And today we are exploring one of the most exciting frontiers of modern innovation, India's space sector. In this episode, we'll talk about India and ISRO's space ambitions, the potential to be a spacefaring nation, and delve into what more needs to be done. So, Ashwin, can you tell what are the major goals of India's space program in the next 2 decades?
Hey, Swati. Thank you for having me here. Well, as we all know, space is seeing it's receiving quite a lot of limelight in the recent times. One, due to all the innovation and progress that we have made, and also because ISRO has a lot of exciting things lined up for the next 2-3 decades. Just a few months ago, the Union Cabinet approved a lot of projects for ISRO, some of the key ones being the Venus orbiter mission. There is also a Indian space station. It's called the Bharatiya Antariksh Station that is in the works. And there is also a brand new rocket that ISRO is going to build in the coming years. And these set like various milestones for India's space program. And it is ambitious. Right now, we are already working on the Gaganyaan mission, which is the first time Indians are putting Indian astronauts in the orbit, taking them to space. This is just the first step, which will progress into eventually taking Indians to the moon by around 2040. So a lot of exciting things lined up. There's already an arsenal of launch vehicles that India already has that we have been using all these years. So the most prominent one being the PSLV, which has been used for many decades now, and which is like our workhorse. It has seen so many launches. It has an extremely high success rate. And there is a new one also named the SSLV, the Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which is meant for like quicker launches and smaller payloads. We also have the Launch Vehicle Mark III, which is our most powerful rocket today. And that is also used for our more ambitious project. It's going to be the one that will be used for the NGLV. Before the NGLV is put to use, it's going to be used for the Gaganyaan program. It's going to be used for Chandrayaan 4 and all of that. But what is interesting, Swati, here is that the launch vehicle technology is one of the major bottlenecks for India's space program, because actually what is interesting to me is that the most value you get out of space is in the downstream market. So the minute you put a satellite in orbit and then you get some data out of it, and then what you do with that data is the real cake when it comes to space technology. That's where the real value is. But to be able to do this, you need strong space transportation system at your disposal, and that's where rockets come in. And so we don't need a lot of companies manufacturing and making rockets. We don't need a lot of government agencies doing this, but it is important that we have enough to sustain and give legroom for our space program to grow. And that is where NGLV comes in. So right now, the PSLV, LVM3, and all of these rockets they have two major limitations. One is that they are simply expendable. So, for instance, when you take a flight to some place. You obviously we have runways where the flights take off and then they land and then they're refueled and they're reused again with some periodic maintenance. We don't have that luxury with rockets as of yet. All the rockets we build, especially the ones in India, are expendable. They are made for use for one time only. Once they put their payloads in orbit, there are various stages of the rocket. Some of them just fall back and fall into the oceans. There are some stages that burn up in the atmosphere. Then there are some parts that eventually will become debris, but they'll eventually deorbit and they'll also burn up in the atmosphere. So the rockets are all being built for a single flight. And the problem with this is, one, that you cannot reuse them. And so each time you have to build a new one, you are taking a lot of time to make that happen, a lot of resources. And with the time, resource, and effort you put in, you're also spending a lot of money. And this has been a bottleneck for the Indian space program until now. It is more than a bottleneck. It's an important consideration because every mission plan needs to balance the demand for transportation systems. And to give you an example, recently, the Venus orbiter mission, in one of the recent reports a few years ago, the mission was initially had to use an LVM-3 rocket, but then they downgraded the rocket to a GSLV Mark II because there were just too many space missions which are going to use LVM-3. So they couldn't find an LVM-3 at the proper time to do it. And then now that there is some reforms happening, it's not that has changed. But these kind of considerations are decided by the availability of rockets. And to give you another example, the LVM-3 right now, we are making only 2 per year, which means that we can launch it twice a year right now because that's the production cycle. But eventually this is also said to be ramped up by taking the help of the private industry and things like that. So one, you have the problem of expendable rockets, and the way to solve this would be reusability. I'll come to that soon. But the other consideration is the capacity of these rockets. So the LVM-3, which is India's most powerful rocket, can carry 4,000 kg to the geostationary transfer orbits, and it is higher for the lower Earth orbit. But this cap on its capacity is itself a limitation for a lot of things India wants to do. For instance, recently a GSAT N2 rocket was launched by NCL and ISRO, and this rocket weighed 4,700 kgs and it had to be taken to the GTO, and they couldn't do it, and so we had to rely on SpaceX to launch this rocket. And it is great that now we have an ecosystem where you can buy your seat on a foreign rocket and send it. It enables a lot of possibilities for the Indian space program too. But for India's strategic autonomy and for India's self-reliance, it is good if we have at least one heavy lift rocket that we can rely on. And this is what the NGLV plans to be. NGLV is going to be able to carry up to 30,000 kilos to the lower Earth orbit and around 12,000 to the geosynchronous orbits by the time it is ready. And this is in the expendable mode. So it gives us a significant boost to our capability to lift heavy objects to space. And also it is the other part, which is that the rockets are expendable. NGLV plans to be partially reusable. So the rocket will have maybe 2 to 3 stages, and the upper stage will have a controlled descent back to the surface where it will be reused. And so this reduces a lot of money, a lot of time in making and building new rockets. So I think this is also really noteworthy. And this is something that we really need if we are going to ramp up our activities in space. This is like a base infrastructure we need to enable a space economy, if that is what we're hoping to build. And it's all our missions are going to depend on this one thing, because if the production cycles are longer, the test flights will take longer and everything else will take longer. So having these rockets is extremely important.
So, to delve deeper, what is the significance of reusability and heavy lift capability in rockets?
To give you an example of how this works, you can take the example of the SpaceX rockets, the US corporation, which has mastered the art of heavy lift reusable rockets. Well, they have completely reusable rockets, which means they launch their rocket and then they land them back. And after some maintenance, some tweaking, and some refueling, they're able to launch the same rocket again. And so, if you're doing this, you are virtually reducing the price of launches to just the fuel. Everything else is extremely affordable. And so by doing this, they have you must have heard about the Starlink satellite internet constellation that SpaceX has. They have over 6,000 satellites in the lower earth orbit. They're able to provide internet globally to anyone that needs it. And they are operating not just in the US, but across many countries. They were instrumental in the Russia Ukraine war, because when Russia took out a lot of the communication infrastructure in Ukraine, the Starlink satellites were able to restore some communication capability to the Ukrainians and enable communication through their satellites. So imagine the amount of flexibility and convenience this offers, right? So, and this entire thing was enabled because SpaceX has these rockets that it can send back to orbit without having to build new ones. And so essentially the cost of launching is extremely cheap. And SpaceX has right now is at the forefront of reusable heavy lift technology. To compare it to the Indian capability, the LVM-3 has around 4,000 kg to the geosynchronous transfer orbit, geostationary transfer orbit. But the Falcon 9, which is not even SpaceX's most powerful rocket, but this Falcon 9 can carry up to 5,500 kgs to the lower Earth orbit, to the geosynchronous geostationary transfer orbit, and it can come back and land. Suppose they give up this landing. Suppose they just do a one-way trip the way LVM-3 or PSLV does. Then they can carry up to 8,300 kgs. So it's more than double of the most that we can carry. And this is like, then you have the Falcon Heavy, which can carry more than twice more than this. And the newest rocket, which is the Starship, which has been catching a lot of headlines recently. Starship can carry. It is still in design phase. They're still iterative. It's still in the test flight design, but it can carry more than 100,000 kgs, which is a massive jump from the scale that we are thinking about these things. And imagine the amount of capability you can have with this technology at your disposal. And right now we are talking about the NGLV, which is going to be ready by 2032, 2034. And we are talking about 30,000 kg to the lower Earth orbit in expendable mode. Starship is able to carry 100,000 kgs with reusable technology, which then it'll come back and it'll be able to go up again. And they are targeting launches like by this. I've heard that the SpaceX targets a launch per day by 2030. With that kind of access to space, the kind of potential you have to exploiting space as a domain is massive. So I still believe that the space technology market is more valuable in the downstream. We need more companies dealing with satellite data, putting more satellites up there, and thinking about how intelligently you can use the data for various purposes on the ground. But getting there is important, and we need really strong capabilities, especially with reusability and heavy lift, because that's the only way forward. And we really need that if we are going to stay as a leading space power in the coming years. And another thing that underlines the importance of these technologies is resources. So right now in space, you have right now the current level of human technology is that whatever we need, we carry from here. So suppose we need a very large suppose we are landing on the moon, and we have a lander and a rover that is going to go on the surface of the moon. We're carrying the batteries, the fuel, and all of that from Earth all the way there, because right now we are using Earth's resources for our space missions. But the hope is in the coming decades, we're going to be able to tap into the space resources in space for all our space missions. Things like asteroid mining, things like using the methane resources on the moon to use it as a fuel, like tap into the moon's resources for as a fuel for our launches further, use the moon as a launch pad for Mars, things like that. So that is still far away though. We are making progress, but that's not proven yet, and it's going to take many years. So until then, it's always that we're going to carry things from Earth all the way to space with whatever missions we have planned, and that means having a lot of load, carrying a lot, and that's where again reusability and heavy lift comes into the picture. It becomes extremely important, and there is also the fact that if you look at space missions, the sensors they put on satellites, the things that is taken to Earth, the lot of time is spent on making this light, because weight is a consideration. They try to lighten it up, they try to shrink it down. The minute you have these heavy lift rockets that can carry bigger things, heavier things, you can let go of some of these engineering constraints. And so that gives room for innovation and possibilities. So that's again, that I think that's a sufficient picture of why reusability and heavy lift capability is important.
So, what can India do next to reach there?
So one thing that ISRO is already doing a brilliant job trying to develop these technologies. ISRO is already working to increase the capability of LVM-3, boosting the amount of weight it can carry, and this is great. But my position is that we should not be putting all our eggs in a single basket. And so there should be a way where we can have multiple rockets just for the sake of backup, redundancy, and a strong ecosystem within India, that if something happens to the launch ports that ISRO has, or if there is an emergency launch and ISRO's rockets are busy for something else, then we need to have more options as we visit space, because though today it's like a cutting edge technology and we don't have to schedule launches a month in advance. Maybe we only schedule launches 6 months in advance or years in advance. That's going to change as the human activity becomes more prominent and prevalent in space. So it is really good to have a bunch of options that we can use, each of these options specialized in a certain department of like space transport. And so to do that, what we need is an ecosystem. And we can build that ecosystem by tapping into academia, by tapping into industry. So while we have ISRO and its rockets as indigenous resources that we can rely on, irrespective of what is happening outside the country, we also need some rockets which are India's in ownership, but by like we can and it doesn't matter if it is completely made in India. And we can make this happen by, let's say, the Department of Space putting out a contract and asking its most capable private industries from taking up this contract. And it's not going to yield immediate results. It's not going to happen in the next 5-6 years, but maybe it'll take decades. But at least you'll have people working on this problem, thinking about this problem, learning skills, and developing capability in this. And it can be a milestone based funding project, where if you do a successful firing test, you get some funds. You complete your first stage and you demonstrate that you have certain kilonewtons of thrust, you get some more funding. And by doing this, you're ensuring that only the successful projects get the funding going forward, and also that there is incentive enough for the industry, for people to take risks to do this in the first place. And academia can play a huge role in innovating and developing this with the industry. And so it's just about opening up the ecosystem and incentivizing people to do this, because it's very, very hard for a private company to just take up rocket building. We already have a couple of them in the country, Agnikul and Skyroot, and they're building rockets. But with the absence of these incentives, they're doing what a private industry would do in this sphere. They are building smaller rockets and targeting lower payloads. Eventually, they will be able to scale up if they desire. But we also need other parallel efforts in this direction. And so this is a great way that the government can do this. And maybe in 20 years from now, if we do this, maybe it'll work. Maybe we will have another rocket alongside the NGLV which can carry a huge weight and maybe be partially reusable. If that doesn't happen, if the whole thing fails, if there is no significant results coming out of it. You still have the skills, the resources, the infrastructure, the talent. You will have built all of that, and all of that can lend itself into something useful also in the process. So I think that's the low hanging fruit for the Department of Space and in the Government of India to tap into.
That was quite insightful, Ashwin. Thank you.
Thanks, Swathi. This was a lot of fun.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.